welcome back to Make Your Monday here with Okashicon Online. We are a little bit late this month, and I do apologize. I had a bit of a health issue last week, and something I could normally resolve quickly by going to the hospital, but with the pandemic on, I decided to just take it easy at home for a while. So we really appreciate your patience in sticking with us at a date that is not a regular date, but it looks like the usual gang's here, and I really appreciate you guys for coming out, even though we did have the switch. Tonight is probably going to be a fairly abbreviated broadcast for a change. I know y'all never believe me, but we'll see. I'm not going to be slides or anything, but I do have a couple of announcements. So remember, Okashicon Online has presentations at least 4 every month. The next one coming up will be on Sunday, back with me, Japan Stories, where we will be talking about Japanese festivals, and the most important part of that is Japanese festival food. So there'll be lots of video, and hopefully you'll have an entertaining time. We had a really great turnout last month with our budget travel and Daiso. Hopefully we can get some of those people will come back, and I hope that you guys will come back on Sunday at 2 p.m. Central Time. It's going to be a lot of food on a stick, as my husband calls it. Also, please remember that Okashicon has regular activities. We have the first Saturday of the month, usually, when I'm not fainting, is anime afternoons, and the next one will be coming up. We're going to have both some, hopefully, clips of Christmas anime, just short clips, not whole episodes, interspersed with interviews with some very wonderful, talented artists that we'd had scheduled for the last time. We're going to bring them back in December instead. Also, the second Sunday of every month, late in the evening, is the Demo Disc Okashicon, where our wonderful gamer guys are playing some of the demonstration sample games from the 90s and beyond, so that you can get your retro game feeling back, especially if you've been watching anime like High School Girl. And then, of course, we have this on the usually second Monday of the month. We will have it in December. I'm not sure if we're going to have Japan Stories in December. We'll talk about that on Sunday. We also have a promotion or a fundraiser on, if we can get that graphic up. So Okashicon, this is the J Fashion Committee side of it, is doing a fundraiser for Out Youth, and it is called Pride Prism Power Makeup. The in-person activity has sold out, but they do have a Zoom activity, and the tickets just went up today. There is a limited number though, so if you are interested, it is the 6th of December, but please be sure that you sign up early, because certainly the other one sold out in just a few minutes, and proceeds do go to Out Youth. So please go to the Okashicon Facebook page for more information. And with that, I think that's the end of our announcements for today. I will say that because my table is covered with stuff, I'm not going to be typing in chat. So I'll just be having to talk to you guys. Feel free to make comments as usual. I can see it on my screen, and I will be responding to you guys. Again, I will try to answer as many questions as you have. This is actually a fairly simple project today, and it's using standard household items, except for maybe the paper you might want to change out, and I'll explain that in a minute. But let's go ahead and flip to the craft cam, where we see the mess that is my desk. So first, I'm just going to show you some samples of what we're doing, and then I will go to talking through the supplies, as you can see here, and then we will just get into showing you what's going on. So the topic today is Japanese paper dyeing. The official term for it is Orizomegami, which may sound slightly familiar to you if you're familiar with the term origami. That's ori for folded and gami for paper. Gami is actually based on kami. I'm not going to explain the Japanese as to why the certain first letter changes, but zome, which goes in the middle, is just dyeing. So it's basically folded paper dyeing, and that is exactly what we're doing. It's a lot like tie dyeing, but on paper. If you guys remembered your supply list, you'll be able to see that everything I have came from my house. I do have some specialist versions of things that I maybe got at Daiso, and another thing that I will show you but didn't use that I got in Japan. But for the most part, you can do this with stuff you have around the house. Let me just show you some samples here. So this is the more vibrant colors, I will tell you, comes with the paper that I got from Daiso. The more muted colors will come from other paper that I had. But this, let me turn this around so that you can see it. This is my #1 most recommended paper. It is in the calligraphy section at Daiso. So this was $1.50 at the Austin Daiso. It comes with 60 sheets. I think it's 60 sheets. Maybe it's 40 62 sheets. No, 60 sheets in a pack. So for $1.50, that's a really good value, I personally think. And so all this, although this says for final versions, like it's the really fancy stuff, this is what other people would probably call student grade calligraphy paper. If you don't have a Daiso nearby, you can order student grade calligraphy paper meant for like Chinese and Japanese brush calligraphy. You can order it online, places like Amazon. You can also get rice paper. You can get that at a lot of art supply stores. There's a reason why I recommend this paper, but I will tell you that in a bit. But I just wanted to show you that first because you'll be able to see the difference in some of these. You'll see very vibrant colors, and then you'll see much more muted colors. And that really, your paper makes a big difference in this. But this is just one sample. I did all these samples for the most part this afternoon. And I have a lot of trial and error to tell you about with this. You will notice that you can see the fold lines. So I had folded the paper up. I'll show you how to do the fold, but you will see that the lines are in there. They've actually been completely ironed out. So this paper is now more flat than it was. But you see the splotchiness of the color? That was because I used the steam iron, and that was a bad move. Don't use a steam iron on there. Have a look at this one where I used a dry iron. You can still sort of see the little holes from the iron on there. But honestly, I discovered in all of my trials of this that it's really not a great idea to try to iron it. You're never going to get it flat. Even if you use a dry iron, it's still going to wrinkle. So I'm telling you this to show you some of the things that I've decided not to recommend and why I'm not recommending them. But that is one of the questions that comes up often is like, can you get the folds out? And the answer is not very well. And even if you do get them out, they'll still show in the die lines. So I wouldn't bother. A lot of the charm of this is seeing the fold lines and the way that you can use it in the future. The texture can really add a lot of nice, I see, oh gosh, you for height. Thank you, Misty. You can certainly, the texture is part of the beauty of the process. So don't worry about that too much. If you want your paper to be completely flat, this is probably not the project for you, although I do have a couple samples later that may be some options if you do want completely flat paper. So just to show you a couple of things, these were folded in the exact same way. I just dip dyed them differently. So this is the same die, the same paper, the same fold. As you can see, creates a very different process or different look. Here's another one on the same paper. I'm showing you this one because you can see this tour. One of the things you need to be aware of while we're working through this process is that wet paper is incredibly fragile. I mean, I can be as delicate as I possibly can be, super, super gentle, and it'll still tear on you. So that's another thing that you just kind of have to plan for part of your project. I would not use this for gift wrap. If you do want to use something like this for gift wrap, I would leave it until it's completely dry before you unfold it, because that's when you're really kind of wrangling it the most, is when you're unfolding it. So these are all on the Daiso paper. And as you can see, it came out very vibrant, very beautiful, no white showing, you know, really absorbed the paper. I have a little joke. I say that that paper is thirsty, like a middle-aged housewife at a Chippendale show. But let's look at some other paper options. One of the things you need to be aware of when using alternative paper, so copy paper, origami paper, is that the more folds you have, the less likely the die is, so this is how it's folded, the less likely the die is to soak through to the inner layers. So you see this one didn't matter. This was super folded, but it was a very thirsty paper. It went all the way through. There's no white anywhere. But this one, I folded it just in quarters as an origami paper. And as you can see, these sides were exposed to the die. This side was not. So it can be a little more disappointing with some of these papers, but I did find out some tricks that you can use to maybe get a more interesting pattern. So I just want to let you know, if you're really struggling and it's just not working for you at all, it's the paper. Some papers are coated in a way that will make it easier to write on, and that ink will absorb. And that side may absorb dye very well, and the other side may be completely blank. So honestly, as you can tell, I use the exact same dye on these, but the paper really can make a difference. However, I don't want you to get completely discouraged. You can still get some interesting effects using copy paper and origami paper and things that you have at home. But this rice paper, well, this calligraphy paper is about half the thickness of copy paper. And it's very, very absorbent. It's made with washi or mulberry. It's got longer fibers, so it's going to absorb the dye more. There are some other tricks that you might want to try if you're really unsatisfied, but you really have to use copy paper, but I'll get to that when we get later on in the process. Mostly I would suggest that you just change your expectations when you're working with copy paper. So here's one that I tried to do and tried to get dye on all sides. That didn't work very well. So I changed how I folded this paper, and I'll show you these folds later. I will get to that. And I just dyed the corners. And as you can see, if you're just dyeing the bits that are easy for the liquid to seep into, you can get some really nice results. So you could reuse this as origami paper, or you can use it for cards. I did not make any sample cards for you. If you want card designs, I can certainly tell you in the future. But I mean, you can go online and just look at like holiday card designs or anything like that. And, you know, as you stack them up, there are millions of card designs out there on the internet. You can use them on Japanese stab binding books, so side-bound stitched binding books, which I think we may do in January. If you are interested in learning Japanese bookbinding with the stitch binding, again, that's something you can do with mostly household tools. Let me know, and we can do that in January, February. And these papers are fantastic that because as you get the thinner papers, you can adhere them onto cardstock or bookboard and they will stick pretty well. So that's another thing that you can use this paper for. Here is a copy paper. It's pretty thick, but the way I folded it made a big difference in how much ink could get into bits of the paper. So again, I will show you some of these folds later. But you just have to keep that in mind. The fewer folds you have and the more edges that you can get, so I find the triangular folds work better, the more you're going to be able to do that's interesting with copy paper. But you need to keep those folds really big. So, you know, imagine that you've only got, see, this is only folded twice in one direction. You're not going to be able to get the teeny tiny little prints like you can on the thinner paper. So I hope that's clear for everybody. If you guys have questions, again, please shout out in the comment section. I am watching. Again, other things that you can do with copy paper is to just dye the edges. I think this would look really nice for invitations maybe, or if you're a letter writer, you could certainly go ahead and reuse this, write your letters on it. You can go ahead and do all four sides of the paper. I didn't, but if you do that, I would recommend that you do two sides and then let it dry and then do the other two sides. But here's one that's just been done top and bottom. Let's see if I can get the whole thing in the camera. There we go, top and bottom. There will be some irregularities, but that's part of the charm of it. If you want something perfect, then you probably don't want something handmade. Handmade, if there's nothing that is, if it looks too pristine, no one's going to think you put any time or effort into it. They're going to think that it either came from a kit or you bought it from somewhere. If someone says, I think it's the Amish who actually say that unless there is something wrong with it, it's kind of an insult to hand making because there needs to be the hand of the artist be visible. And you need to show that there are some small imperfections. In fact, the Amish will put some intentional mistakes in there, even if they're really good, but they will still put some intentional mistakes in there just to show the artistic process as part of it, that it wasn't a machine-made design. So those are samples. I'm going to put these aside for now, and we can refer to them later if you want to look at them again. Let's look at the supplies. So obviously I have mentioned paper. And again, I highly recommend this specialty calligraphy paper from Daiso or specialty calligraphy paper from Art Supply Store. Any of the rice papers, the thinner the paper, the better it's going to be. And also the longer the fiber, what it's made out of. So a natural fiber is going to work better. Well, I say natural fiber, I mean cotton is made out of wood, but wood pulp fibers, so copy paper is made out of wood pulp. Wood pulp papers are not going to work quite as well, and there is a bit of a finish on here, so that can go, this is a you know, copy paper, printer paper, there's a bit of a finish to make the ink stick better, but that can resist some dye. So, you know, you just kind of have to play with it. Use what you have. You can certainly use paper towels as well. Paper towels create some interesting effects. But for today, I'm just going to use these 3 papers. So this is, I'm mostly going to use the paper, clear paper, a little bit of copy paper, and some origami paper. I bring you the origami paper just to show you you can use pre-colored paper. So again, pick these back up again. As you can see, these were already dyed, and then I just over dyed them to create some interesting effects. Now, let me move the paper out of the way just briefly so that I can show you the dye process. Unfortunately, my table is kind of small, so it is more difficult to not spill everywhere. That's why my cat is very safely locked up. I do have to apologize to my husband because last month I blamed him for some of the noise going on in the background, and it was 100% the cat. Okay, it was 95% the cat. Can you use coffee filters? Good question. Yes, you can. In fact, coffee filters will work really well. Coffee filters get used in a lot of scrapbooking type stuff because they have a really interesting texture. Coffee filters, tea bags, the type of material that you use for tea bags. Also, this process, if you use different dyes, can be used on fabric. You can't use it with the particular dyes that we're working with today because these aren't truly dyes. Another thing you need to know, I need to mention, is that these are all completely water soluble, which means if they get wet, the dyes are going to run off again. Doesn't matter that it's already dried. And in fact, if you've got another color on your hands, which definitely happened to me in some cases, you've got one color on your hands and you touch a wet paper, the color that's on your hands is going to rub off onto the wet paper. That's why I have some alternatives to touching the paper to some degree. But let's show you what I'm using. I am using, this is just from my local grocery store. Let's see if I can move it up close to the camera. This is just regular gel food coloring. I think that's probably backwards on your camera. I apologize. This is just Wilton gel food colors. Apparently they don't make liquid food colors anymore. They're all gels. They are a semi-liquid, semi-thick kind of texture. It really doesn't matter. I mean, whatever you've got at the grocery store, I think this is about $3, $4. It's perfectly fine. If you have Easter egg dye left over, don't add the vinegar, just put it in water. If you want to use watercolor that's come in tubes, you can't use the like pan kind. Well, you could, but you'd probably use a whole pan of it, so I wouldn't do that. You could use tube watercolor. You can use India inks if you want a really vibrant, and that would be completely waterproof. So India inks, acrylic inks would be totally waterproof, and you could use them on things that might be outside in the weather. But just to make this simple and kid-friendly, I am using just plain food coloring. Now, a couple of tips on how to mix your food coloring. So you'll see that I have bowls here. Again, because this is food coloring, after you use them for, great for macarons. That sounds tasty. Okay, so back to what I was saying. Because this is food coloring, you can use regular tableware and then just throw it in the dishwasher afterwards. There's no problem. But if you're using something that is not food safe, so like the India ink or the watercolor paint, don't use your bowls or glasses that you would use from your kitchen. Go ahead and find something that's specific for paint, or something like plastic cups or something that you can dispose of later or keep just for paint or dye in the future. I do have all those things upstairs. I didn't want to get them. I'm lazy. Also, the type of container that you use will make a difference. Sometimes you want a wide surface area, especially if you have, so depending on what you're doing, if you're working with copy paper in particular, the thicker paper, a wider surface area is going to give you more space to get that paper down into the ink and get those edges really well. However, if you want the ones where you're just dyeing the edges of it, like this one, and you want to dye more than a small amount like this, then you might want a glass, because this way, because I just rolled this up very simply. Let me see if I can just roll it quickly for you. So I just rolled it up loosely. You don't want it to be too stiff, although of course now I can't do it for you properly on camera. But if I were to put it into a glass like this, as you can see, I'd be able to get more surface area and I could dye a much deeper amount than just what I have here. But remember that the amount of water that you use and the amount of dye that you use, the more water you have, the more dye you need to keep your colors vibrant. So if you do want to use a tall glass like this, you're going to need a lot more of your dye and a lot more water. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up one of the colors in this glass here so that you can see about how much I used in these other ones. So you can't necessarily go by drops because the gel, I will say the thicker the gel part, because every single color in here was a little different. 4 colors and 4 different viscosities of liquid. That's about 10 drops or so. And then I would probably add about an ounce of water to that. This is yellow. It looks kind of orangey in the glass or in the bowl, but it does come out yellow on the paper. Now, again, if I wanted to have a very deep or a long amount of paper, I would obviously have to add about 4 times as much dye and then 4 times as much water, and then I could sink the whole paper into there, and you can see how that would look. I will show you that a bit later. So are there any questions about what we are using today for dye? I will show you, because I did bring it out here. If you go to Japan and go to the washi paper museum, you can buy actual paper dye. I did not use these because I didn't want to show off that much. And I also wanted to show you that you don't need paper dye. But if you do get this type of paper dye, this will be permanent colors in the future, so you don't have to worry about it washing off. But this was about, so it's 713 yen before tax, so about $7 for 5 colors. If you really want to know if you're going to Tokyo, I can tell you where the store is, and you can go, you can learn to make washi paper on your own. Do not hire a guide to take you there. We were totally ripped off by that because the person speaks perfectly good English. Don't hire a translator. Don't do that. But it was a really fantastic experience. A wonderful sort of museum and hands-on. It's a paper making company. Fantastic experience. So what else do you need besides paper and dye? I highly recommend a lot of paper towels. A lot of paper towels. You'll see why when we get further on. If you do not want this to get all over your hands, I was dyeing this afternoon and I did get pretty much all of it off my hands, but if you had a manicure or something, that could totally ruin your manicure. So be sure to wear gloves if you have them. That's my #1 recommendation. If you don't, you can use things like chopsticks or clothespins to hold the paper as you're dipping in and out of the dye. You will still have to touch it when you're opening it back up. So unless you are leaving it to completely dry folded, which could have some problems, it would be really crinkly after it dries. You know, it's kind of, you have to decide what the bigger risk is. So is the bigger risk touching something and getting on your hands? I mean, it does wash off pretty easily, but the biggest problem I think is transfer. When you're going from one color to another, you can easily get it on your hands, and then transferring it as you're picking up another piece of paper. I created a lot of mess throughout a lot of pieces because they had big like blue thumbprints on a yellow paper or something like that. So just so you know, you can use tweezers. There's a couple of other options. So anything that you can do to like hold the paper and then stick it down into, my chopstick skills are not that good. You will not be seeing me use these on camera. Clothespins are pretty easy. So let me start by showing you some of the folds. There are 2 folds that are taught everywhere, but obviously you can create your own. You can use any type of origami folds that you like. I am going to first put on some gloves, again, because it's easier to wipe your hands in between colors. You never really want to sit here and just watch someone put on gloves, right? I mean, it reminds you of going to the doctor or other unpleasant events. The dentist, maybe. Oh, let's not talk about the dentist. Terrible. So how has everybody been? while I'm sitting here doing something really boring, I'll just ask you guys, how are you doing? How's your autumn going? This weather is crazy down here in Central Texas. I know that the rest of the world, sometimes it's just gotten really cold all of a sudden. But if you guys, also, if you have any feedback on what you'd like for me to teach next year, obviously I have ideas, but if there's something you really want to learn, I will do my best to make it happen. I'm going to leave the paper towels off to the side for a moment, and I'm also going to move the die out of the way as best I can, because we need to start with some folds. Let me get, so I do have to be drinking water fairly regularly. Apologies for that. That's kind of why I fainted, is that I got really dehydrated. So let's look at some paper choices. I'm going to start with some Daiso paper. As you can see, I got a little splotch on there. I don't know if the camera picks it up. I got a little splotch from using it. This dye just gets absolutely everywhere, and this paper is super thirsty. So the simplest fold that we're going to go with, the one that I use the most, is just accordion folding one direction, and then accordion folding the other direction, and then dip dyeing. So how do you get your accordion folds to come out to be equal amounts? You could either measure, which I'm not into. That's not my thing. I am just going to go ahead and fold up my paper. You can use a bone folder or a ruler if you really want your edges to be crisp. I don't bother. As you may remember, bone folders used to be made of bone, real bone. Now they're made of plastic. So if you are opposed to animal products, you can still go to a craft supply or art supply store, buy a bone folder. It's going to be plastic. I still managed to get a little wonky on this. I mean, I'm not, again, if you're worried about perfection, handmade is never what you want. But as you can see, this is not accordion folded. This is weirdly folded. Now you've got to go back and refold it. So that's why the first folds I don't press very firmly. They're just a guideline to show me where to go back and fold again. So I'm just repeating some of the folds from before, trying to get them to line up as best I can. But again, I'm not really into perfection. It kind of defeats the purpose. Now, some of your folds will go ahead and line up. In my experience, half of them will be the direction you want them to go in, and half of them will need to be refolded. So that was pretty quick to accordion fold this direction. Now it's much easier to do it the other way. So I go fold it in half, and then you will fold this in half just as a guideline. Well, no, I don't even bother with that. I'm not going to do multiple ones. So fold this back down, and then flip it over, fold it back down, and that has created an accordion fold. So if you're familiar with accordion fold books, it's the same thing. It's like a little squeeze box accordion. Also, if you have, I don't have it handy, or I'd show you. If you collect goshuin, which are the stamps that you get at temples and shrines in Japan, the Goshuin Cho, which is the book that you can make or buy. I made one in Kyoto and I bought one in Tokyo. The book that they get collected in is an accordion fold, so that once you're done, you can open the whole thing out and show them. If you guys want to see that sometime on Japan Stories, I'd be happy to show you my goshuin. Maybe I'll pull it out next time, because a lot of the festivals I attended were at temples and shrines. So what colors? Anybody have any preference on colors? Let me see some. Maybe we'll go with a holiday theme. So depending on what winter holidays you celebrate, you may either want to use blue or green and red. I did several blue last time, so maybe I'll just start with the red. Sorry, there's a little bit of stuff floating in this. I think my cat knocked some things into the water earlier today, but that's okay. It'll still work. Now, I will tell you, when you're using the Daiso paper, or the calligraphy paper, you got to be quick, because it'll soak up water so fast. And then if you're using copy paper, you got to be slow, because it'll soak up water so slowly. So you just kind of trial and error the first couple of times. So again, let's just do this. quick dip. See how much that is already blending up. Now, I like to shake it out, and then should have pulled one out in advance, but have your paper towel here. You just don't want too much liquid dripping out all over the place. No, actually, before I forget, before I pick another color, let's get the color wheel up there for a minute. We have a picture of the color wheel. If you guys are not familiar with the color wheel, this is actually really important because you don't want to cross the color wheel when you're picking colors, because if you do, you will make mud. 100% guaranteed icky brown. Not even a particularly pleasant brown. Sometimes it comes out gray. It's just dingy and unfortunate. So you can mix these colors. Absolutely. You can, if you can see, we've got the primary colors and we have green, I guess because green's really popular in food coloring, but you can certainly mix these colors according to what you see on the color wheel. You can mix your yellow and blue to make green. Same on a Ziploc commercial, right? Everyone knows that when yellow and blue make green. You can mix your blue and red to make purple, yellow and red to make orange, and then you can continue. You can hand mix these colors to your heart's delight. I do it often. I didn't do it this time because I also want to show you what happens when they bleed into each other. So if you don't have something like this, just go online and look up color wheel, grab one in a picture of this and have it for reference. Okay, we can take that down now. So as you remember, if I were to do red and then go into green, those are opposite each other on the color wheel. So I would have red on one side and green on one side and then brown in the middle. I'm not going to do that just because I don't want brown. In fact, brown is my least favorite color. So we're not going to do that at all. We are going to go from the red and go into the blue on the other side. So again, quick dip. You can see that is already on one side really, really absorbed. I'm going to go maybe a bit more on the bottom here. There, you can watch that absorb in there. This is going to go all the way. It's going to bleed all the way into the other color. Again, shake it off. Channel your inner Taylor Swift. I will tell you, look at how that blue is already taking over the red because I redipped it. Also, be careful when you are blotting off onto a paper towel. If you, like I did, if you sort of blot the red onto the blue, it's going to pick up the blue from the paper towel. That's why I recommend having a lot of paper towels handy so that you don't have to reposition it. I'm going to go ahead and blot as much excess liquid out of there as I can. And you can see paper towels dye beautifully. What you'd use them for might be a different issue. Now, the other reason I recommend wearing gloves is that it's easier to go ahead and get the dye off of your hands. And if you've already gotten some on there, I have some clear water. I'm just going to stick my gloves into the clear water. Again, because it's food coloring, you don't have to worry so much. And then I am going to rinse off my gloves completely so that as I'm opening this, I will not have too much dye transfer. So be careful because obviously I just got dye transfer off of the paper towel. But yeah, see how vibrant those colors are in the paper towel? If you're not sure if your dye is deep enough color, use paper towels to test. Remember, everything will dry a little bit lighter. So factor that in. It's usually about 10 to 15%. But you can always add more food coloring. I find that it's easiest to add the food coloring first and then pour the water in because the gel mixes in better and you don't have to stir. But if you do have to add more food coloring in later to darken it up, you will need to stir it with something. So that's where I recommend a spoon, chopsticks, something like that. You can use your finger, but obviously clean up your finger if you do, because otherwise you'll get transfer. So let's open this back up. I recommend when you're opening up, try to always touch the same color. Otherwise, you will definitely get transfer from one color to the other. And again, be very, very gentle if at all possible. It's still probably going to tear on you. But let me see how I can get this. It helps to let gravity work with you and kind of hold very gently. Again, this is a boring bit, kind of watching the reveal. There's not a lot I have to say in this part. Y'all are just not saying anything in chat today. I hope you're enjoying this. I know that a lot of you do watch without creating an account, so I do understand that if you don't have an account, you can't actually give me any feedback while this is live, but I would recommend that you do create an account. Oops, see, watch that just tore. Yeah. I recommend that you do create a Twitch account. It is free. You will see ads on here, but you'll see ads even if you don't have a Twitch account. So there's not really a lot of downfall. And if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber and you don't have any other Twitch accounts that you follow, you can use your free Twitch Prime to subscribe to us, and you will never see ads on our channel. Now, we do try to be considerate and try to make the ads when you're not going to be as, as engrossed in things, because ads will completely cover up the feed and you will miss what happens while the ads are on. So we try to do the ad roll at the beginning of every broadcast so that hopefully you won't get stuck with ads again. But if the broadcast does run long, you will get ads that will cover things up. So the only way around that, unfortunately, is to subscribe to our channel. So this is what it looks like. Unfortunately, like I said, it did tear. Now, my biggest limitation on how many of these I can dye at one time is having a place to put these so that they dry. Because obviously, if you leave them in a funny position, they will dry even more crinkly than when they started. So give me a second. I got to figure out. One thing I didn't plan out for this episode was where to put them after I started this process. I think they're going to have to go on my sofa. I have a leather sofa, so I can wash it off. There we go. Yeah. And it fell down. Okay. Well, that's what happens. Let me show you another fold technique. So again, there are two main techniques. You still start with accordion folding. Try not to get too much water on my desk. So you do this, you start the same way with an accordion fold. I'm going to do this in bigger sections this time so that it's not so much effort to undo, so that you guys aren't completely bored. So let's just do a section like this. Open it back up, and I only have one fold to refold, which is here. There we go. Now we have accordion folded into quarters. Now, this is the part where I said you might want either a protractor or a mat like mine that has your angles marked out. So you can't quite see terribly well because that die is in the way. This has 30, 60, 90, and 45 degree angles marked out here. The traditional method is to do a 60-degree fold. I am terrible at doing a 60-degree fold to create a completely equilateral triangle. I could use this measurement device here on my, I'm going to do a right triangle because I find it easier. But certainly if you look online and you look up Orizomegami, remember that's the word for what we're doing, you will see instructions on using a 60-degree triangle more often. But to start your right triangle section, you obviously just fold it down this way. This will, then you flip it over because we're still going to accordion fold this. Even though we're doing triangles, we're going to keep accordion folding. Try to keep everything lined up. Again, it's art. It's not science. And I just dropped a bunch of paper on the floor, but I will wait and pick that up later. One more time. Now you will have leftover at the end. So let me show you what I did with the leftovers. Normally I just fold it back onto itself. The triangle is not going to come the full way. If you did have extra, like when I worked with the copy paper. Oh, so just so you know that if you're working with the calligraphy paper, it is European size, so it's A4 rather than letter size. So it's a little bit longer and a little bit narrower, by like a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch in one direction and 1/2 inch in the other. So you could have like an extra 1/2 inch sticking out, in which case I would just fold it back this way. But now we have a triangle. Let's see if we can, I can show you how to do the dip dyeing without holding it. Here we go. I am holding it with clothespins. These clothespins have already been used for dyeing, so I'm not going to be using them for clothes. You don't have to worry about that. I would say if you have plastic clothespins that you can wash off, maybe that's a little bit better. Otherwise, do not use these on clothes again, because again, once the dye gets on there, it could potentially run in the future and get all over your wet clothes. I mean, food coloring is not really going to dye your clothes, but it could stain, especially the red. You'll notice I'm wearing a black t-shirt just to be safe. But honestly, this is the 3rd time in this past week that I've done some of this. I haven't gotten it on me at all so far, knock on wood. But, you know, hopefully it's okay. So let's try some green again for a little bit more holiday cheer. Now, again, with the triangles, you can do 2 sides and then flip around, do another side. You can just do the points. How much you dip in, how far you dip in is all part of the process. It's entirely up to you. A lot of times with the accordion folds, you can, when you did the more rectangular one, like I did last time, I'll just do the corners instead of doing the whole thing. But I will say with this calligraphy paper, because it's so thirsty, don't plan for there being a lot of white space. However you do it, there's not going to be a lot of white space left over. In fact, I'm not going to start with the green. I'm going to do green and yellow. No, sorry. I realized earlier the green and yellow was a weird mix. So no, I'm not going to do that. I'll do some green and some blue. See, I just stuck that in there for a second. And that's a lot of green that automatically came up. Now, in this case, I am intentionally going to duplicate the colors. So again, I like to sort of tap off the excess just so it's not dripping everywhere. And then make sure you're tapping it off on an area that does not already have color on it, because otherwise it will transfer. So again, let's bring the blue in. Now, again, we're going to have intentional bleeding. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see that? Where there is a little line of darker color, just barely on the outside. That is what's called the dye breaking. Because obviously this green was made with yellow and blue together. The yellow absorbs first and then the blue, and this is called a dye break. If you're not wanting something like that to happen, obviously you'd probably be very disappointed by that. And what I would do is I would probably hand mix, because this is how this came in the green directly from the factory. But I think if you were to mix it yourself, I'm not sure, you probably won't get that break. But to cover up that break, or cover up a little bit of that break, I'm going to go ahead and put blue on here anyway. So it's not a real problem. Barely soak that in there. That blue really, let's try that again. See how that blue is really taking over? And it's going to keep seeping all the way into the middle. Seep, seep, seep. Such a thirsty paper. I mean, it's gorgeous. This is, I'm not complaining. But when we get to showing you copy paper, guarantee it will not have that much of an effect. So again, leave as much liquid off on the towel as you can to make less of a mess. And now, once again, let's see how much I can show you in this boring part of opening up the reveal. Y'all just not chatty at all tonight. Am I that boring? And see, it tore already. I need to not be paying attention to you guys. Okay, that's it. I'm not paying attention to you guys ever again. I lie. See if I can open it and open it. Oh, that is a really pretty combination, if I do say so myself. So you can see it's running off onto my hand. I'm not going to be able to do this without muddying the colors a little bit. if you want to know what blue and green put together make, they make teal, which is one of my favorite colors. Okay. This is really the worst part about working with the delicate paper, is that I have to be so careful with it. And even still, it really wants to stick. Okay. Oof. It's a really lovely color, but I don't know how well I can open this. Again, the more water you have on the paper, the more it's going to stick to itself and the more fragile the paper is going to be. Now, what you can do, in fact, what I may have to do, and I apologize, I may have to let this sit just for a little bit because I feel like it is so saturated with liquid. If I try to pull it open anymore, it's going to tear apart. So I'm just going to set this aside for a little while. Ugh, do I have a convenient place to put it? Not exactly. Okay, I'll just put it on top of yesterday's on the floor. Remind me to get that later and show you if anyone is watching. I know y'all are watching. I can see you there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and change out the paper towel. Now, remember I said I dropped my paper earlier? Let me pick that up. Give me 1 second. Whoa, I know this is super boring part. Whew. I'm back. Wasn't that exciting? I know. Thank you very much, Director Sun, for putting the please stand by notification up. We are going to try to use a different paper so that I can show you some of the alternative techniques that you need when you don't have a thirsty paper. Okay, let's just start with the origami paper because honestly, it's a little easier to work with a smaller paper when it's not very thirsty. So in this case, I am just going to fold it. I'm going to fold this into triangles again. And because we already have some color on this paper, this way I'm going to just start, because this is a square, I can put a triangle there and a triangle here. And you've already got your triangle folds. Now remember, the insides of this paper, the folds that are further in, are going to be less likely to absorb anything. So the outside bits that are touching the water directly are going to absorb more. The inside bits won't get as much dye on them. But I have found that this particular fold actually works a little bit better. Now, here's what you need to know is that we are going to be trying to leave the paper kind of open this time so that as you dip it in, you have both sides being exposed to the dye. Before, you didn't need to worry about that. You could hold it quite firmly closed. In fact, one of the things you can do, there's another type of shibori dyeing that's called clamp dyeing. And I'm not going to do it because this has dye on it already, but you could clamp with clothespins and put the whole thing in the dye, and then the clothespins will resist. So you'll have little almost squares where the clothespins were. But that's a little bit more complicated, and we can talk about that if we do a fabric dyeing in the future. Clamp dyeing is a really fascinating process, but it's a little more difficult to do right now. But let's just show you. So the things to bear in mind when you have less thirsty paper, you need longer time in contact with the dye. You need to have your paper more open so that you can have more surface area that touches the paper. And sometimes you just need to gently rock and swish a little more. So again, remember, you don't want to make mud. So we've got yellow now. You're actually okay with any of these colors because any of these colors will mix with yellow into a not terrible secondary color. But let's see. We haven't really used a lot of green today. So let's go with the green. And again, keeping it kind of open. I should use the clothespins, but I'm not going to. Keeping it kind of open. you'll notice I've just dipped it in there for a bit and there's hardly anything going on the paper. Whereas the other one, it just soaked up and soaked up. I have to kind of put it in there. I don't know if you can see, let the dye run on the inside of the folds. You will also be able to see, I kind of let it soak and squish. As it gets softer, it will squish in there more. You will also note that the colors are just not as vibrant. And that's not because this is on a butter yellow paper. That's because this paper just is not going to absorb as well as the other paper. But you can still create an interesting effect. So we've got some green going on there. I like to, now because you've added a lot of extra water, you really have to tip it off more. Pour it off more. Sorry, I'm getting a British onion. Pour it off more, let it drip out, and then really pat well on the paper towel so that you're not dripping everywhere. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and dip into the yellow. You may not be able to see a lot of distinction, yellow on yellow. And in this case in particular, because we've got a fold line in here, whatever I put on the next side is not going to get anywhere near as much coverage. So I'm going to stick it this way. I'm going to try to get more dye to go in. I have to grip it by where we've already dyed. So I'm going to get dye on my gloves, and you'll probably see some of the blue come off under this green as I'm holding it, but we'll see what we can do. Dip it into the yellow. Looks like I don't really have enough yellow left, so I gotta really squash it in there. Again, scoop it up, let it run into those crevices, squish and squish. Now again, this time our folds are not next to each other, they're nested. So that's going to be harder for the dye to get into this paper. It's going to take a little bit more patience to get any type of depth of coverage on this side. So you kind of lay it down. This is where your vessel, your bowl or cup or whatever, size is going to make the most difference, because the bigger area you have, the more you can squish things in. But here you go. There is some of the yellow showing. There's less on the inside. It's only really where I scooped and let it run in there and then run out the other side. But there's a lot less on that bit. But still, let me just go ahead and blot off as best I can. Open it up, blot off more. And this is where you'll really be able to see the difference between the inside and outside layers. So here's the outside layer, which did a pretty good job of adding color to it. You can still see the paler green and the vibrant yellow. And that was the inside bit. So as you can see, did not get very much coverage at all. It was only the bits that I ran into. And there's still a lot of liquid. And you can still see, even though yellow and green normally would make a perfectly fine color, there's still a bit of mud going on, a little bit of brown. And that's because this dye, again, it breaks. And it's the weirdest thing. I have not experienced that before. So again, that brown in there is from the dye not mixing quite the way you'd expect from the color wheel. Normally you put yellow on top of green, you just get kind of a lime yellow green. But in this case, it's just kind of created some interesting leaf texture effects. But it's still a fairly interesting piece all up. I mean, the brown isn't out of place in an earth-toned paper like this. You can see here's some blue bits from where the blue transferred off of my gloves onto the yellow as I was opening it up. But again, I don't think it ruins anything. I think it's perfectly fine. So put that aside. Do you guys have any questions? Because I've really shown you the majority of the techniques. The only thing I haven't shown you is just a dip dyeing technique, and I will get to that with the copy paper. So I'll put this aside again. My floor is going to be covered in things. Let's show you the dip dyed. So again, this is if you've got copy paper. You can see that I've already had some color transfer. This is where I'm just rolling it into a tube so that it will fit inside of my, oh, I can get it. You don't want to fold it necessarily or crease it, but you do need to be able to open it up. So let's bring this tall glass back in here, dip it in there. Now, oh, I didn't roll it quite tightly enough. If you're not familiar with how to tighten a spiral from the inside, you just grip and then tighten this way. And now more of it will fit into the jar here. Now you want it to be kind of loose and be opening up as you're doing it, because otherwise the inside layers will have a bit of a crease to them. And that came from the edge of the jar, the glass, as I was pulling it up. But I think it creates a fairly interesting effect. You could, again, you could use different colors. You could do the other side. Now, if you let it run, you stand it up this way, your little drips, I don't know if you can see there, these little drips are going to run down. So if you were to go from one side directly to the other, it could potentially drip down, which I think is an interesting effect. I'm not worried about that. It's hard to keep it in camera. I apologize. So with the rice paper, if you hang it to dry, will some of the colors still move? A little bit, yes. That's why you want to pat off as much excess liquid as you can. If you hang it to dry, as opposed to laying it flat, remember that it is very fragile. So you need to have it in an area where it's not going to get blown by a fan. Otherwise, it will tear right where you have it put up. I have a drying rack, like a clothes drying rack from IKEA. That's normally what I do. And especially if I have an area like here where there's some that aren't spaces that aren't dyed, you can go ahead and clothes pin it onto a clothes drying rack, and it makes it so much easier. You can just let it hang fairly flat that way. But if you don't have the option, I would just spread it out all over your dining table. Again, if you have a cat, that's a bit of a problem. These are animal safe food colorants, but yeah, I mean, my cat has white paws, and we were kind of waiting all day to see if she was going to just dip her feet right in there. And we've always wanted her to accidentally wind up with a foot full of dye. So, you know, but she didn't. She disappointed us today. So that is pretty much all that I have to share with you today. I know we are bang on an hour, which is amazing for me. But that is really it. If you have questions about how to use this, if you have questions about, you know, if something's not working for you, or if you want to use alternative dyes or alternative colorant sources, I am happy to answer your questions at any point. You can drop me a message on our Facebook group. You can drop a message basically anywhere that you saw this communication, or you can message me either at Kintsugi Style or julianneinjapan@gmail.com. And certainly you can also drop me a line on Instagram at julianneinjapan or Kintsugi Style. So that is pretty much it for tonight. Wow, I actually ended on time. We were bang on time. I'm excited. Are you excited? No, you're not. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. We can probably turn the camera just onto me as opposed to looking at this. I want to say thanks to everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it. I know a lot of you will be watching the replays later, so if that is you, again, I appreciate your time. I hope that you have found this useful. Next month, we are going to be talking about wrapping with fabric instead of paper. So it's furoshiki. Furoshiki are things that you can buy. They're also things you can make. But for next month's supplies, all you need is some kind of object, and maybe like if you have cloth napkins, those work really well. So they're definitely things that you can be doing along with us. And if you have any ideas for what you'd like to see in 2021, please let me know. Otherwise, I will just keep making things up. But remember, since we began this journey, In August, we have learned how to do kumihimo, which is a braided cord. We have learned how to do sashiko stitching. We have learned to do some boro. Now we're learning paper dyeing. So if you're clever, you'll realize that you can create a sachet, which on one side has sashiko stitching and the other side has boro fabric collage with the kumihimo border, and hang it on your holiday tree or send it as gifts. You can use your Orizomegami paper to create a card, and then next month we will show you how to wrap it with a furoshiki, and that is an entire holiday gift all ready to go. So thank you so much for joining. We will be with you on the second Monday of the month in December for furoshiki, and do come back on Sunday at 2 p.m. Central Time. We'll be talking about festivals, festival food, and I will try to show you my Goshoin Cho. So thanks again. Thanks everyone involved with OkashiCon Online, and we will see you soon. Good night.